Hi, I'm Elodie. After my husband died, I thought the worst was over. I was wrong. When I begged my parents to let me and my son stay, they laughed, called me a burden, and tossed me a deed to a broken cabin worth $2. My father said, "You belong with the trash." So I stayed silent. I moved into that rotting house, clutching my son's hand and my pride. But silence doesn't keep you safe. It buries you alive. And when I found what they'd buried under those floorboards, I realized the real fire wasn't the one that burned the house down. It was the one they lit inside me. And once it started burning, there was no putting it out. Soft pause. Tell me, what would you do if the people who raised you tried to erase you? Before we dive in, let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. This one, you're going to feel. The road to my parents' house was darker than I remembered. The streetlights blinked like they couldn't make up their minds, and the oak trees leaned in too close. Ivo was asleep in the back seat, his head pressed against the window, mouth open just a little. The hum of the old Chevy felt louder without my husband's voice beside me. 2 months gone, and silence still found ways to hurt. When the porch light appeared in the distance, my chest tightened. Same white house, same wind chimes. It looked smaller now, colder, like it had been waiting to remind me I didn't belong anymore. I parked at the curb, took a breath that burned on the way in, and woke Ivo gently. "Mommy, are we there?" "Yeah, baby, we're here." The screen door creaked before I even knocked. My father filled the doorway, his shoulders wide, face carved in disapproval. No hug, no hello, just that stare. "Elodie," he said, "didn't expect to see you dragging back here." I forced a small smile. "Hi, Daddy." My mother, Lorna, appeared behind him, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Oh, Elodie, you should have planned better, sweetheart. These things happen. You can't expect life to stop for grief." Her tone was sugar, but her eyes were stone. I stepped inside anyway. The air smelled like furniture polish and cooked onions, just like when I was a kid, except now I felt like a stranger standing on old memories. We sat around the same dining table where birthdays used to happen. Ivo held onto my arm, quiet. My sister Claudette scrolled through her phone at the far end, pretending not to listen. "I just need a place for me and Ivo," I began. "Just for a while, until I can get steady work again. I'll help around here, cook, clean, pay for whatever we use." For a moment, no one spoke. The clock ticked like it was counting down to something awful. Then Claudette laughed, a sharp, high sound. My father joined her, a low rumble that filled the room. "Carry you?" he said finally, leaning back. "We can't carry dead weight, Elodie. You're a grown woman. You chose your life, and you lost it." The words landed like gravel in my chest. Claudette snickered behind her hand. My mother just sighed. "I'm not asking for charity," I said softly. "You're asking for a crutch," my father shot back. "And we're done handing those out." He reached into his shirt pocket and tossed an envelope across the table. It skidded to a stop near my plate. I opened it. A folded deed, yellowed at the edges. A property description I barely recognized. "There's your inheritance," he said. "Worth $2 on a good day. You can rot there if you want." He fished something from his pocket, a rusted key tied to a frayed string, and tossed it after the paper. It landed next to Ivo's little hand. "Don't lose it," he added. "It's all you've got now." My fingers trembled as I picked it up. I slid both the deed and the key into my purse, careful not to look at anyone. "Thank you," I managed, though it came out cracked and small. The room stayed quiet, except for Claudette's whisper, "Guess even pity has limits." I rose slowly. Ivo clutched my hand as we walked toward the door. My mother didn't move. My father's chair creaked. "Good night," I said, not waiting for a reply. We stepped onto the porch. The air smelled of rain and rust. I opened the car door when his voice came again, low but clear enough to pierce through the night. "You belong with the trash." I didn't turn, didn't give him the satisfaction. I just tightened my grip on Ivo's hand and got behind the wheel. The engine coughed to life, headlights spilling across the yard. In the mirror, the porch light flickered once, twice, like it was laughing too. The drive to the cabin took an hour. The highway thinned into dirt roads and pine shadows. Ivo slept again, his face soft and untroubled. By the time I reached the property line, fog had crept in thick as breath. The cabin was worse than I remembered. Paint peeled like dried skin, windows fogged with grime. The front door sagged from one hinge. "Is this home now?" Ivo asked as I unbuckled him. His voice was small, curious. "For now, baby," I said, forcing warmth I didn't feel. The air inside smelled like dust and wet wood. I tried the light switch, nothing. I lit a candle from my purse emergency kit, set it on a cracked counter. The flame flickered against the warped walls, showing old wallpaper I once helped my mother hang. I pulled the key from my pocket, staring at the rust and string. My father's voice echoed in my head. Trash, burden, worthless. I closed my fist around it. "If they think this is trash," I whispered, setting the key down on the counter, "maybe I'll find what they threw away." Outside, the wind pushed against the cabin walls like it was testing them. I tucked Ivo into a makeshift bed on the couch, pulled my coat tighter, and stared at the floorboards beneath my feet. Something about the sound, a hollow echo with every step, made me pause. That night, as Ivo slept, I found something buried beneath the floorboards, and it wasn't dirt. I didn't mean to stay up, but the wind found its way through every crack and crevice in that house, and the sound of it tugged at something in me I hadn't felt in years. Ivo's quiet breathing filled the room, steady and warm under a pile of blankets I'd found in an old chest. But I couldn't sleep, not with that hollow knock under my foot earlier, like the floor itself was trying to speak. I lit a candle, the same one from my purse, and walked barefoot across the wooden planks. The cold bit at my toes. Every step sent dust swirling into the air, catching the flames flicker like ghost light. I knew the spot. Third plank from the hearth. It had groaned differently under my heel, like something beneath it shifted. I knelt, fingers tracing along the warped edges. One tug, then another. The wood lifted easier than I expected, like it had been waiting to be disturbed. Beneath, wrapped tight in oilcloth the color of old newspaper, was a box, heavy, tied with a faded pink ribbon. I stared at it for a long moment. The knot, the way it looped, it was hers. My mother had always tied her gifts that way, even when all she could afford was a jar of pickles and a folded recipe. My breath caught. I didn't want to open it right away. Part of me wanted to stay in that moment of maybe. It felt safer than the truth. But my fingers moved anyway. The cloth peeled away slowly, the ribbon falling limp into my lap. Inside the box sat a leather journal, its corners frayed, the kind she used to keep grocery lists and prayers in. I touched the cover, then opened to the first page. Her handwriting. I would have known it anywhere. She had these soft loops, like she was always trying to keep her words gentle, even when her heart wasn't. Beneath the journal was a photo, creased but still clear. My parents, much younger, standing beside the porch of this very cabin. They were smiling, not the kind they wore at church or family dinners, but real smiles, like something good had just happened, like they were still people before bitterness settled in. I'd never seen this photo before. There was a key next, silver, worn, with an engraving too faint to make out until I tilted it under the candlelight. Lockhart Trust Co. That name rang nothing in me, but the way my mother had kept it tucked away said it mattered. Finally, at the bottom of the box, a sealed envelope. Yellowed, edges curled, but my name written across the front in careful script, to my daughter. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The first line made me stop breathing. If you're reading this, it means your father has buried more than just our past. I sat still for a long time, eyes fixed on those words. Ivo stirred on the couch. I didn't move, didn't blink. The candle burned low, but I stayed curled in the corner of that room, clutching the letter like it held the only piece of truth I'd ever known. The morning came slow, light slipping through a gap in the wall, casting a beam across the floor right where I'd lifted the plank. Ivo was already awake, watching birds from the window like he'd forgotten where we were. "It's not so bad here, Mom," he said, smiling. "There's so much sky." I nodded, sliding the box back beneath my coat. "It's different, huh?" He shrugged. "Feels like it's ours." I didn't say it, but I hoped he was right. I wanted this place to mean something more than insult and exile. I wanted it to give us something back. Maybe not now, maybe not even soon, but eventually. Around mid-morning, I heard a knock at the door. 3 slow taps, followed by silence. I peeked through the cracked curtain and saw an older man standing on the porch with a mason jar of peaches and a dented metal toolbox. "You Elodie Voss?" he asked, eyes squinting against the sun. "Yes, sir," I said, stepping out. "Name's Avery. Used to know your mama, back before things got messy." He handed me the jar. "Made these last fall. Figured you could use a little sugar." His voice carried the calm of someone who didn't rush unless the house was on fire. "Thank you," I said, unsure what else to say. He looked past me into the cabin, nodded. "Needs work, but bones are strong. Your mama worked her fingers raw on this place. Never saw a woman fight harder for land that was hers fair and square." I blinked. "Hers? I thought, my father said." He let out a dry chuckle. "Your father said a lot of things, but that deed wasn't his to give. This land was part of a trust your mama had before they married. Funny how that got lost in the paperwork when she passed." My stomach turned. "A trust?" "Lockhart Trust. You don't know about it?" His tone shifted, not accusing, just surprised. I shook my head slowly. "I found something, a key." He scratched his beard. "That bank folded 20 years back. Got caught in a scandal, real hush-hush stuff. Some folks lost everything overnight, but if there's a key..." He let the sentence hang. I wanted to ask more, but he seemed to sense it. "If I were you," he said, turning to go, "I'd read that journal real close. Your mama was the kind to hide the truth where no man would think to look." That night, after Ivo drifted to sleep again, I lit another candle and opened the journal. Her words were like a voice from a past I'd never known, part warning, part confession. The final entry stopped me cold. "He'll never find the rest. But if you do, Elodie, you'll know the truth about what he took from us." I laid both keys on the table. The rusted one my father had tossed like trash, and the silver one that had been buried under my feet. They glinted side by side, different metals, same weight. "Maybe trash knows how to survive," I whispered. The next morning, I packed Ivo's lunch with quiet hands. He hummed as he stuffed books into his worn backpack, blissfully unaware that the ground beneath our lives had started to shift. I kissed his forehead at drop-off, told him I'd be back by pickup, and prayed it was true. Driving into Baton Rouge felt like stepping back into a room you swore you'd never enter again. The skyline hadn't changed much, but the streets felt tighter, like they knew I didn't belong anymore. My palms stayed damp on the wheel the entire way. The radio played a song I used to love, but I didn't turn it up. I wasn't here for comfort. The Lockhart Trust building still stood, tucked between a faded post office and a vape shop, its stone columns casting long shadows in the morning light. The brass letters above the door were half missing. What used to read Lockhart Trust Co. Now only read Lo Tur Co. A fitting metaphor, I thought. Inside, the marble floors were clean, but the air was stale. Dust clung to the corners like it had tenure. A man behind the front desk barely looked up until I slid the small slip of paper toward him, the number from the letter. He read it once, then again, and finally blinked. "That's real old," he said, voice catching. "I'll call someone from downstairs." He tapped the phone, murmured into it, then motioned for me to sit. I did, perched on the edge of a plastic chair, clutching my purse like it held a life raft. 10 minutes later, I heard soft heels approaching. A woman in her 50s stepped forward, gray at the temples, glasses on a chain, eyes sharp beneath the calm. "Ms. Voss?" she asked. "Elodie," I nodded. She tilted her head. "You said your name's Voss, as in Marie Lockhart Voss's daughter?" I hesitated. That name hadn't been said aloud in years. "No, Merrick. I used to be Merrick." Her face changed, eyes widened. "Marie's daughter? That can't be right. I was told you both died in a car fire." She said it gently, but the words felt like ice. "A car fire?" "I'm standing right here," I said, voice barely above a whisper. She took a step back, breath catching. "Then someone lied." She led me through a hallway that smelled like old glue and typewriter ribbon. Down a narrow flight of stairs, the temperature dropped, and the walls turned from polished to cracked. We reached a heavy door, and she typed a code into a keypad that groaned before unlocking. Inside was a small metal file box. Dust clung to it like it had been waiting for someone to remember. Labeled in faded marker, Lockhart Family Trust, confidential. She opened it slowly, hands steady. Inside, papers yellowed with time, legal filings, a few sealed envelopes, and one laminated page that made my stomach turn. "That's a death certificate," she said, eyes scanning. "It's dated 20 years ago, but this doesn't make sense. This was filed with no coroner's signature. That's not legal." There it was, proof. I wasn't just thrown away, I'd been erased. She flipped through the documents, her fingers hesitating on one, a signed transfer of property rights from Marie Lockhart to Harlan Merrick, my father, dated 6 weeks after my supposed death. Ms. Hale's voice dropped. "If this is real, someone forged a lot more than a death certificate." I sat down hard in the nearest chair, the room spinning. All the times my father called my mother soft, weak, sentimental. All the years he mocked her name, her dreams, her projects. He didn't hate her because she failed him. He hated her because she had something he couldn't steal, until she died. And now I knew he hadn't waited for her to die. He'd buried her on paper while she still had a heartbeat. And he'd done the same to me. I reached into my coat and pulled out the key on the frayed string. The little blade of metal caught the light, and I noticed, etched faintly on the side, was a number. I held it next to the lock file. It matched. She didn't trust a safe. She didn't trust banks. She hid the truth in a floorboard, the same way she probably hid her grief, in silence. I traced the rim of the key, voice low. "Mom, you hid it here, didn't you?" Ms. Hale was watching me. She didn't speak until I stood up. "Be careful who you tell," she said, placing the documents into a thin folder. "Your father, he still has friends in this town. Some of them owe him favors they don't talk about in daylight." I nodded. My legs felt numb, but my mind was burning. Outside, the air smelled like car exhaust and cinnamon rolls from the corner diner. And parked across the street, faded red paint, dented fender, was Soren's truck. My brother. He didn't wave, he just sat there, eyes locked on me, arms resting on the wheel like a warning. The breeze picked up. The string on the key lifted, catching sunlight like a signal. I turned away from the sidewalk and headed straight for the car, my fingers gripping the steering wheel tighter than I needed to. I didn't look back at Soren's truck. If he wanted to act like a ghost, watching from the shadows, I'd let him haunt. The drive back felt longer than it had that morning. Baton Rouge slowly gave way to cracked pavement, then gravel, then the dirt road leading to the cabin. By the time I turned into the clearing, dusk had slipped in like smoke. That's when I saw it. The door. It hung half open, swaying slightly with the wind, like someone had left in a hurry or entered with no intention of closing it. I pulled up fast, headlights cutting across the porch. Evo's backpack lay there, toppled on its side, zipper undone, papers scattered like leaves. My chest clenched. "Evo!" I called, throwing the door open. No answer. I rushed up the steps, heart pounding, flashlight trembling in my hand. My boots hit the porch hard, echoing like gunshots against the trees. The beam from the flashlight darted through the dim cabin, landing on overturned cushions, a half-moved chair, and a sound. Not footsteps, drawers, being opened, being closed. I stepped inside. The air was heavy, like someone had just breathed out and forgotten to breathe back in. "Soren," I said, sharper than I meant. He turned slowly, standing by the fireplace with the box. My box. The one from beneath the floorboards. The one my mother had wrapped like a goodbye. "What are you doing here?" I didn't shout, but my voice cut just the same. He didn't flinch. "Dad sent me. He said you've been digging around in things that don't belong to you." My stomach turned. The way he said it, like he believed it, like he really thought he was the one protecting something sacred. "I'm not stealing," I said. "I'm reclaiming. Everything in this house was Mom's. You know that." He looked down at the box, then back at me. For a second, just a flicker, doubt crossed his face. But it vanished quick, like he'd been trained to erase it. "You're not thinking straight, Elodie. He's worried about you. Said you were unstable." That word. It hit like an open hand. I stepped closer, blocking the door. "Is that what he told you when he faked my death? When he forged Mom's will? That I was unstable?" He didn't answer. He just slid past me, brushing my shoulder as he left. "I'm not the one you should be worried about," I called after him. But the door had already creaked shut behind him. I stood there, chest heaving, the box in my hands like a weight I didn't ask to carry. Then, from the trees outside, I heard leaves crunching, quick, light steps. "Evo!" I shouted, rushing out. He emerged from the woods, face pale, breathing hard. "There was a man," he said, clutching my coat. "He came from the house, said he was a friend, asked where you were." I dropped to my knees and wrapped my arms around him. "Did he touch you?" He shook his head. "I ran when I heard your car." I kissed his hair. "If anyone ever asks about me again, you come find me. Right away, no matter what." He nodded into my shoulder. "Okay." That night, after Evo fell asleep with his arm draped over his stuffed rabbit, I sat by the window with the documents on my lap. I didn't turn on the main lights, just the candle. The flickering cast made the cabin feel like it was breathing. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You're making things worse for yourself. Go back to your family." I stared at the screen for a long time before pressing delete. My fingers hovered over the keypad, tempted to text back something that would match the venom, but I didn't. I couldn't afford the energy. Instead, I slipped the trust documents and keys beneath a loose board near Evo's bed. Somewhere safe, somewhere they wouldn't look. Then I checked every lock, every window, every curtain. I sat on the floor, legs tucked beneath me, staring at the wall opposite the bed, the same wall where the morning light had broken through. Now it held the candle's glow like a secret trying to speak. If I ran now, I'd lose the only thing that mattered. If I stayed, I'd have to become someone they couldn't erase. I whispered, "If they want a war, they'll get one. But I'm not leaving." Sleep came in fragments, light and flickers, never deep. At some point, I slipped into something half-conscious. And in that in-between, I saw her. My mother stood by the cabin wall, her hand resting on it like it could hold her up. Light poured through her chest, like she was made of it, not bone, not blood. She didn't speak at first, just looked at me like she'd been waiting all these years. Then, finally, they'll come for what's left, but don't give it back. I jolted awake. The candle had burned down to wax puddles. The sky outside the window was bleeding into a pale orange, and the key, still on its string, lay across my lap like it had never left. I must have drifted off again at some point, still sitting up in that chair, the key lying across my lap like it had always been there. Morning light filtered in through the cracked blinds, hitting the dust in the air like slow-motion snow. Ivo was curled up in bed, his breath steady, one hand clenched around the sleeve of his hoodie like he was holding onto something in a dream. Then came the knock, sharp, authoritative, nothing like Mr. Avery's soft tap from a few mornings ago. I blinked, heart kicking into motion. Quietly, I stood and stepped to the door, careful not to wake Ivo. The floorboard creaked under my heel. I opened it just enough to see her, mid-30s, tailored blazer, clipboard in hand. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. "Ms. Voss?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Shiloh Ames, Louisiana Department of Child and Family Services. I'm here following up on a report we received." My throat tightened. "What kind of report?" She didn't blink. Neglect, possible mental instability. Those two words, mental instability, hit me square in the gut. I didn't have to ask who put them there. My father had used that phrase like punctuation for years. I stepped aside, fighting the heat rising to my face. "Come in." She walked in like it was already hers, clipboard out, eyes scanning. The broken window by the kitchen, the loose pantry door, the unpainted trim. She was checking off boxes I hadn't even seen. "I moved in a few days ago," I said quickly. "The place has been abandoned for years. I'm still cleaning, fixing. Do you have heat?" "Yes, space heaters. 2. I keep them away from the walls." "Pantry looks low." "I'm going grocery shopping this afternoon. I have receipts if you want to see." She glanced toward the back room. "May I?" I nodded, leading her past the peeling wallpaper. She looked into Ivo's room. He stirred but didn't wake. She smiled gently then, just for a second, and it made me wonder if there was still a person behind the clipboard. Her eyes landed on the floor near his bed. A board wasn't sitting flat. My stomach dropped. "Is there something under there?" she asked. I stepped between her and it, placing my foot over the seam. "Just old boards. They creak." She didn't push, but her pen paused mid-check. After she finished, we stood in the living room. "You'll need to come in for a follow-up," she said, handing me a white business card. 2 days from now. Bring Ivo." I nodded, lips tight. "Can I ask, who made the report?" She tilted her head. "It was anonymous." Of course it was. She walked out without another word. I watched her car disappear down the dirt road. Then I saw it, Soren's truck. Farther off this time. Just enough to pretend it was coincidence. My fists curled so tight, my nails bit into my palms. I closed the door and finally let it all fall. The weight of it, every accusation, every shadow cast by a man who'd tried to unmake me, hit all at once. "They're not just trying to erase me," I whispered into the quiet. "They're trying to take my son." I sat down at the table and pulled out my mother's journal. The last page I'd read stuck with me like a wound that wouldn't heal. When they can't own you, they'll call you unstable. It wasn't a warning, it was a prophecy, a map. I turned the key over in my hand, the string fraying between my fingers, the tiny etched letters catching the light. My chest rose and fell with slow fury. They'd dragged me through enough mud. They'd buried my mother in silence. Now they wanted to bury me in paperwork and lies. But I wasn't going under, not this time. I took the lawyer's name from the envelope tucked in my mother's journal, Anwin Hale, Legal Aid, Baton Rouge. She'd signed a witness affidavit 20 years ago, just days before my mother died. I dialed the number with shaking hands. A woman picked up on the third ring. Anwin Hale's office. "My name's Elodie Voss," I said. "My mother was Marie Lockhart. I believe my father forged documents and stole my inheritance." There was a long silence. Then quietly, she said, "Mrs. Voss, I've been waiting for this call." The words dropped into me like stones, sinking straight to the place in me that had stopped believing anyone would ever say them. The silence after that call felt different. Not hollow or hopeless, but charged, like the space before thunder. 2 days later, I was sitting in the front seat of my car outside the legal aid office, staring at the building's modest brick facade. Ivo was with a neighbor for the afternoon. I needed him safe, away from whatever this meeting might uncover. Inside, the office was quiet, minimalist. A ticking wall clock, certificates lining the wall. The kind that said, "This woman's been fighting for people like you longer than you've been scared." Anwin Hale stood as I walked in. Her hair was cut short, face plain but purposeful. She studied me for a long second before speaking. "You look just like your mother." I forced a smile, but it didn't hold. I didn't come here for comfort. I came for truth. On her desk, a neat stack of folders waited, each labeled with bold black marker, "Lockhart Trust Case, Archive Copy." Before I could say anything, she raised a hand gently. "Let me show you something first." She opened the top folder and slid a few documents across the desk. My fingers hovered before I touched them. Land transfer forms, notarized, stamped, legal. Then a power of attorney document, joint signatures. One of them was mine, except it wasn't. It said Elodie Marie Merrick, dated 20 years ago. But the handwriting was too polished, too smooth. I was 12 that year. I didn't even know what power of attorney meant, let alone how to sign it. My hands started to shake. Anwin leaned in slightly, voice even. "Your father used this to take control of everything after your mother passed. The land, the assets, even your guardianship. Legally, you consented." I stared at the signature again. It was perfect, neat, believable. But what stopped me cold wasn't my name. It was the witness line. Harlan Merrick, his handwriting. That sharp, rigid slant he used whenever he was trying to seem formal. It was all over the margins of my school permission slips growing up. He didn't just forge my signature, he made me part of the lie. "He said I was unstable," I muttered. "He told CPS I couldn't take care of my son, and meanwhile he's been doctoring papers since I was a child." Anwin didn't flinch. "It's a common tactic, using legality to cover betrayal. But your mother, she saw this coming." I looked up. "She did?" "She came to me 2 years before her death. Told me she was scared. Said she didn't trust the notary Harlan used. So she created a duplicate, what she called a mirror trust, with alternate arrangements and a sealed letter meant only for you." She opened another envelope, aged and yellowing. Inside was a short, handwritten letter in my mother's familiar cursive. "If you're reading this, it means the truth has found its way back to you. Harlan convinced our family to sign over things they didn't understand. He told them it was temporary. He made Blythe think it was for tax reasons. Soren thought he was just helping me sign off on a refinance. He made you a witness before you knew what that meant." I exhaled hard, almost gasping. "He tricked them all," I whispered. "He manipulated your grief," Anwin added. "And then he used your name to secure the final transfer of the trust." I sat still for a long moment, letting it sink in. My family hadn't just turned a blind eye. They had been used too. Not innocent, but not fully aware either. I looked up. What happens now? Anwen's eyes didn't waver. If you're ready to challenge it, we can. But this goes beyond inheritance. If we bring this forward, it becomes criminal. Fraud, forgery, possibly conspiracy. I bit the inside of my cheek. Even Soren? If he knew, yes. If not, we can argue coercion. I looked at the letter again. My mother had seen the whole thing coming. She had planted breadcrumbs in case I ever found my way back. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like someone stepping into a war already halfway fought. I want to move forward, I said. Anwen nodded and began copying the files. By the time I stepped outside, the sky had gone cloudy, a shadow creeping across downtown. I crossed the street slowly, glancing at my reflection in the glass window of a closed storefront. That's when I saw it. Black SUV, parked across from the legal aid building. Windows tinted dark. Engine running. My phone buzzed in my pocket. One message, no name. Stop digging. You won't like what you find. I stood still for a second, the cold edge of fear brushing up my spine. But then I looked at my reflection again. My jaw set. My eyes didn't look like the girl who used to flinch every time Harlan raised his voice. I whispered, just loud enough for the words to reach the glass. Neither will you. By the time I got home that night, the moon was already sinking behind the trees, casting long, crooked shadows across the cabin's porch. Ivo was asleep in the back seat, his arms wrapped around the ragged dinosaur plush he never let go of. I carried him inside, tucked him in, then sat on the edge of my bed with the locket still hot against my skin. Sleep never came easy anymore, but when it did, it came heavy, like sinking into concrete. I woke to a soundless dread. At first, I thought it was just a dream, the kind where something is wrong but no one says it out loud. Then the smell hit me. Not the soft, comforting scent of wood burning in the stove. This was acrid, sharp, chemical. I bolted upright. The air felt thick. My throat tightened. A faint glow bled in under the door, too bright, too orange. Ivo. I tore out of bed and raced down the hall, yelling his name. His door was half shut, smoke curling out from the edges. I shoved it open and found him curled beneath his blanket, coughing in his sleep. I yanked him into my arms, wrapped him tight in his blanket, and turned. The hallway behind us was a corridor of flame. The wooden beams groaned above, blistering with heat. I pulled my shirt over my mouth, cradled Ivo tighter, and ran straight through it. The front door splintered as I shoved it open. The porch cracked underfoot. We tumbled into the grass just as a loud, violent roar erupted behind us. The fire surged, swallowing the roof. Windows blew. The cabin, the only place that had been ours, collapsed inward like it had been waiting to die. I held Ivo in the dew-wet grass, whispering his name again and again. His tiny fingers clung to the collar of my shirt. Only when I looked up did I see it, something that made the panic settle into something colder. Near the porch, just at the edge of the gravel, sat a plastic red gas can, tipped on its side, and next to it, 2 clear boot prints, heavy, not mine. They led away toward the road. My hands fumbled for the locket. It had slipped beneath my shirt in the chaos. The chain was warm, the key inside even warmer, metal against skin like it had absorbed every second of heat and held on just to prove it survived. They hadn't just tried to burn down my home, they tried to erase us. Again? I didn't cry, not yet. There wasn't time. Sirens howled through the trees, bouncing off the hills and back at us. Fire trucks arrived first, then a sheriff's cruiser. Flashing red and blue lights painted everything like a bad movie. I held Ivo tighter as they checked us for burns, tried to take him from my arms. I didn't let go. In the flurry of noise and water and shouted orders, I saw him, Soren. He stood behind the caution tape, too still for someone who just happened to be passing by. His mouth moved like he was asking questions, but his eyes weren't searching the flames. They were searching me. "What happened?" he shouted, as if this was all some horrible coincidence. I stared. Back. He knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. One of the firemen leaned over, murmured something to a sheriff's deputy. The man frowned, looked at his watch. I caught just enough of their exchange. The sheriff was notified 20 minutes ago. Before the call came in, they were waiting. One of the officers approached, gentle but firm. "Ma'am, I need to ask you to come with us. There's been a report filed. We're investigating the possibility of insurance fraud." Ivo clung tighter, panicked. I bent down, kissed his head. "You stay with the medic, okay? I'll be right back." My voice didn't shake, but inside I was crumbling. At the station, everything smelled like bleach and old coffee. The lights overhead buzzed like bugs. I sat on a hard plastic bench, still covered in soot, my hands blackened, my hair singed at the ends. The room was cold. Outside, through the glass wall, a small group had gathered. Press, neighbors, strangers with opinions. One of them, holding a camera, shouted as I walked in. "Mrs. Voss, did you set the fire to collect on the land trust payout?" I said nothing. That silence, they would spin it however they wanted. Guilty, crazy, broken. But in the glass pane of the interview room, I saw myself. Unrecognizable, but not destroyed. The same face my father used to sneer at when he'd mutter, "You're just like her, soft, weak." Not soft anymore, not weak. When they finally let me go, hours later, I stepped outside to a gray sky just starting to warm with dawn. Anwen had pulled every string she had to make bail. She stood waiting by the curb, not saying a word, just handed me my bag and walked me to the car. But I didn't get in right away. I had to see it. We drove in silence until the trees started thinning, and blackened smoke still hung low over what used to be my cabin. Nothing was left but charred timber and twisted metal. I walked through the ash. The wind stirred the remains like paper. Everything was gone, except one thing. Near where Ivo's bed had been, the corner of the metal box peeked out from the rubble. I dropped to my knees and brushed away what was left of the floorboards. The top was scorched but intact. I pried it open. The papers were half burned, edges curling inward. But deep at the bottom, wrapped in plastic and tucked in cloth, was the key. Still whole, still mine. I closed my eyes and pressed the box to my chest. "You didn't destroy me," I whispered, voice rasped and low. "You just made me visible." The sun finally broke over the tree line, casting light across the wreckage. It hit the key first, and for a second, it blazed in my hand. Bright, defiant. Not a warning anymore. A weapon. It wasn't even 8 in the morning when Anwen clicked the remote and the screen came to life. The news anchor's voice was already mid-sentence, soft but sharp, like she knew exactly how far to push without sounding too interested. Speaking now is philanthropist and former judge Harlan Merrick. There he stood, my father. Behind the podium, dressed in gray and grief, like someone who'd spent the night praying instead of orchestrating lies. He was flanked by 2 familiar figures, his attorney on one side and Soren on the other, standing straight as a fence post with that same distant look he wore at our mother's funeral. "My daughter," Harlan began, pausing with just the right amount of weight to seem burdened, "has been deeply unwell since her husband's passing. We've tried as a family to help her, but she's refused support, refused care." He turned slightly, placing a hand on Soren's shoulder like a prop in a courtroom drama. "Now, after a tragic fire and troubling signs of instability, We're forced to take steps for the sake of her child. Evo deserves a safe, stable home. I didn't realize I'd stood up until I felt Anwen gently touch my arm. My hands had curled into fists. My jaw was locked. The burn on my wrist from the fire stung under the gauze, pulsing with every beat of my heart. "They're stealing him," I said, my voice flat. Anwen turned off the TV. "They're staging the public trial," she said, "so now we stage ours." She handed me a small flash drive. Inside are scanned copies of the trust papers, your forged signature, and this. She tapped the corner. "A video your mother recorded the night before she disappeared." I blinked. She made a video? "She knew this would come," Anwen said. "She didn't plan to survive it, but she planned for you to finish it." The weight of the drive in my palm felt heavier than the box I'd pulled from the ashes. That afternoon, we drove in silence toward the courthouse. Baton Rouge felt smaller than usual, like it had turned in on itself. The streets were lined with cameras, reporters, and curious strangers holding phones in their hands like weapons. As soon as I stepped from the car, the swarm moved. "Mrs. Voss, do you deny the fire was intentional? Are you mentally fit to care for your son? Why haven't you responded to your father's statement?" Anwen didn't flinch. She held the press packet in one hand and guided me straight up the steps. At the top stood the very podium Harlan had used just hours earlier. I could still see his fingerprints in the gloss. I stepped behind it. The microphones buzzed. I cleared my throat. "My father says I'm unwell," I began, the words catching but not breaking. "Maybe grief does make you see clearly, because I finally see who he really is." The murmurs started immediately. I pulled out a photo, one taken just days ago in Anwen's office. It showed the forged document with my name scrawled in 12-year-old cursive and my father's handwriting neatly witnessing the lie. "He says he wants what's best for Evo," I continued, "but what he really wants is to silence the last voice that remembers the truth." Then I played the video. The screen of my phone wasn't large, but the crowd hushed the moment my mother's voice broke through. "If this is being played," she said calmly, her face lined and tired but unmistakably determined, "it means I was right. They'll call my daughter crazy. They'll accuse her of things she didn't do. But they'll do it because truth scares them, because truth ruins them." Gasps followed. A cameraman near the front dropped his shoulder slightly, stunned. Anwen stepped forward, holding out the legal notice for distribution. The seal of the court gleamed. Soren stepped up suddenly, reaching for the microphone like he could take it all back. Anwen blocked him with a voice sharp enough to cut steel. "You touch that cable," she warned, "and you obstruct an active investigation." He froze, and for the first time, I saw something unfamiliar flicker in his eyes. Doubt. I turned back to the crowd. "This house you called trash," I said, voice clear, "was my mother's grave, and now it's your confession." The murmurs grew louder. Reporters looked to each other, hungry. A few phones rose higher. Behind them, I saw the outline of a sheriff step up to Harlan, whisper something just out of reach. His face didn't change all at once. It cracked in pieces, the kind of crack a mask makes when it's worn too long and finally gives way. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Everyone saw it. Soren took a step back, just one, but enough. Anwen put her hand on my shoulder. "You can go now," she whispered. "Let it burn on its own." I didn't answer. I just walked. Down the same steps my father had stood on with so much certainty. Past the press, past the questions, past the flashbulbs and stares. Evo wasn't with me, but I carried every second of our story on my back like armor. Let them talk, let them dig. They wouldn't find a broken woman. They'd find the daughter of Marie Lockhart. The wind shifted the moment I stepped past the police tape. The field was quiet, too quiet. What used to be the front porch was now a patch of scorched earth, ringed by splintered boards and ash-crusted weeds. Charcoal-colored soil stretched ahead like a scar, but at the very edges, where the fire hadn't fully reached, wildflowers had started poking through, stubborn little things, blooming anyway. Ivo trailed behind me, holding the metal box we'd salvaged from the wreckage. His fingers were smudged with soot. The box clanked softly with each step he took, and he cradled it like something sacred. "Can we go home now, Mama?" he asked, his voice small, tired. I knelt beside him, brushing a bit of ash from his cheek. "We are home, baby," I said. "We just have to build it again." He nodded like he understood more than I wished he did. We stood there for a long time, just breathing in what was left and letting it settle. 2 days had passed since I'd stood on the courthouse steps and said what needed saying. Since then, the world had shifted beneath all of us. Harlan was now under federal investigation, fraud, perjury, conspiracy. Every suit and tie he once called a friend had gone quiet. Even the law firm he bankrolled scrubbed his name off the website. Soren had vanished. His truck was spotted on the edge of town, keys still in the ignition, but no one had seen him since the broadcast. Anwen came by that afternoon, paperwork in hand, and worry tucked behind her eyes. She stood on what used to be my kitchen floor, now just dirt and soot, and said, "It's going to take time, but the truth's out there now. You didn't just break their hold, you opened the door for others." I thanked her, but my eyes kept drifting toward the horizon, toward what was lost, not what was won. That night, I returned to the ashes alone. Ivo had fallen asleep in our temporary apartment, an old duplex Anwen helped me rent, close to the school, quiet enough that I could finally exhale. I sat down on the blackened ground, the box on my lap, and unfolded my mother's letter. It smelled like smoke now. The edges had curled, but the words survived. "If they ever call you worthless," she'd written, "remember, you come from fire." I ran my thumb across the ink, then pulled the key from my pocket. The same key that had followed me through every dark room, every question mark in this whole damn mess. I took Ivo's tiny hand in mine the next morning and slid the string through his fingers. "Keep this," I said softly. "It doesn't open anything now, except memory." He looked up at me, confused, but didn't let go. Later that day, I drove to the cemetery. I hadn't been back since her burial. Her grave sat beneath a willow tree that had seen better seasons. The stone was simple, weathered. I traced her name with my fingertips before placing the key on the headstone. "You were right, Mom," I whispered. "They buried truth, not you." A breeze rustled the branches, carrying a single leaf to the ground. Sunlight cracked through the clouds for the first time in days. And I smiled, really smiled, not because I won, because I remembered her, and I remembered myself. By the time noon rolled around, the church bell rang nearby. One slow toll that sounded less like an ending and more like a beginning. The next morning started quiet. Ivo and I made pancakes in our small kitchen. The smell of butter and maple syrup filled the air. The TV was on low in the background, another update on the Merrick scandal, but I didn't need to hear it. "Mom?" Ivo asked, poking his fork at a pancake. "We don't need the old house anymore, do we?" I looked at him, the light from the window catching the edges of his curls. "No," I said. "It already did its job." We finished breakfast without another word. Outside, the sun climbed steadily, spilling warmth through the blinds. I stood by the window for a moment, watching the street below. People walked their dogs, kids rode bikes. Life kept moving. So would I. Some stories don't end with revenge. They end with remembering who you are. "Ah, Urs,"